This is Art 157, Week 8 on Physics. We're going to start by looking at 3D Max. The techniques I'm showing you, you can use Blender as well, because 3D Max you can get an educational version, but it's pretty expensive if you want to get a professional version to create stuff. So this is basics, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how to export a simple object. So we go to Create, Standard Primitive Box, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a cube. And I'm just going to use the keyboard entry option. So I'm just going to do a 128 cube and hit create. Now the thing to be aware of is 128 units in Max is the same as 128 units in Unreal. So you get a 1-to-1 translation, and you can also import or download online if they have pre-existing models that you can bring in. So you can actually bring in a figure and use it to scale in Max. Okay, so that's really the only thing I need to do with the cube as far as making the geometry. You don't have to do anything special. The things we do have to do is we have to add a material to it. So we'll go into the compact material editor, which is the older material editor. And you don't have to do anything besides assigning a material and setting it up properly so that when you export it, there's actually a material channel. If you don't do this, when you go to export and import it, you won't be able to assign a material and you won't see it in Unreal. So we'll assign that, and all we need to do is go to diffuse or any channel. I usually just do diffuse on the safe side. Add a bitmap. Okay. I'm not going to assign any bitmap, so you can see there's none there. But what it does is this basically created the map channel for the material. So that's all I have to do on that end. Once I'm done with that, now I'm ready to export this. So take the box, export, export selected, and the default is a FBX model. Now we're going to use a different type of file format. FBX was basically created when Autodesk purchased 3D Max Maya. They already had AutoCAD and they wanted a way to go between the different file formats, and we'll look at that in a minute. We're going to use an older file format, actually one of the oldest file formats, that's ASE. ASCII is basically character based, and this is an old enough file you could actually open up and read it, and it'll explain the vertices and stuff, so it's actually legible. It's not as proprietary, and it's accessible. So at any rate, we're going to go, and I'll just call this box, nothing special. Just make sure whatever you name it, you don't put any spaces in the name. You won't be able to import it. So I'll hit save. And then there's some default settings. Now I opened this up and I've already done this, so it's set up properly. You want to make sure that only geometric is on. You don't want to export shapes, cameras, lights, helpers. Those are just other objects. You can't do anything about the use keys or force samples, so leave that alone. Vertex colors, to my knowledge, aren't supported upon export with the ASE. Mapping coordinates, you need this. This is how the texture is assigned to the surface. Mesh normals defines which way the faces are, so you need that, and then mesh definition, which is the definition of geometry and the material itself. So once you have all those all set up, you hit OK. It'll digest it, and that's basically it for setting up the box. Now we go to Unreal. We'll go into the content browser, and I'm just going to do import, and I'll go to the desktop, and I will find this object, box ASE, hit open. And then I'm just going to create a demo package and grouping. I'll call this meshes, or static meshes, sometimes I call it box. Hit OK. It's going to give you information about import stuff. It should work fine. The one thing we do have when we're bringing it in is basically it's set up. Now one thing you notice is there's material loaded, and that's because I had in the environments, I had that highlighted when I imported it. Generally, that won't happen. What you will get is if you go into the mobile engine and you look at materials, the default material that you're going to get, and I'll show you how to change it, is basically the checker. So just be aware that I have that highlighted. It normally doesn't do that when you go to import it. So let's open this up and we'll look at it, and you can see that it has assigned this material already. Now if I go in and open it up, you'll see there's already a physics demo material that's loaded up. What we want to do is I'm going to go up and grab the engine, and I'll just go back and show you basically the opposite of what you need to do. So you can play around with it. Let's pull up the materials and go down and look, and there's our default material. That's basically what gets assigned whenever you create something. And if you open up LOD, which stands for LOD information, and then open up elements, and then material, and click this arrow, now you can see that you have a material that's loaded up. It won't be blue when you actually see it, and then once you update it, you can do Tool, Save Thumbnail Angle, and now when I go in here and I go to save it, let's go back to All, and go back to my mesh I just created, you see it updates it automatically. Now I'm going to just grab a metal material that I'll use throughout it. Obviously this is a demo, so it doesn't really make a difference what material. I just was going to pull that up. And I'll use it. Okay, so I got that set up and mapped. The one thing this is missing is this doesn't have any collision. If I go to View, Collision, shortcuts right here as well, you can see there's nothing. Now, you don't have to necessarily make collision geometry. You can make it in 3D Max and export it. You basically define it, and then you give it a special extension using 3 letters. So UBX, USC, USX, and UCX are basically the 3 different. And you basically include that when you go to export your items. Now, in this case, we can do something real simple. We can do 6 DOP simplified collision, and it basically that's a box. So it creates a box over the shape, and you can see you can do more and more complicated ones. Now, for the shape, it isn't a big deal, but you can increase and decrease it depending. Now, the thing to be aware of is physics engines like things that are convex, but they don't like things that are concave, which have indents. If they do, you have to use this one, and it has a controller. If you don't do that, then you run into some issues. Basically, for instance, imagine a tube. If you just created a default collision geometry around it, you wouldn't be able to go inside the tube. You'd only be able to go on the outside of the tube. So there's some issues with that. So we're done with this. And we'll go back to the package and do all. And let's just save this demo package. Now right now it's in new packages. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to Maps Custom, and I'll just do demo package for this one. Hit save, and now we got to go back up to, let's close down the engine, let's go to Maps Custom and demo package, which is right here, and you can see that it's not fully loaded. You see that little item. So once I bring it into the scene, or I can go fully loaded, now that's gone, and also it updated the texture when it pulled it in. So we're good to go with this. Now I can drag this in like we normally do and have an object, but because we're talking about physics, what we do is we highlight it and you right click and you have some different options. I'm just going to use the rigid body. There's 2 different basically classes that are available. I'm just using this one. It's the more generic. This one's more specific. And I bring this in, and now all I need to do is I'm just going to build this scene real quick. And we'll go do a play. And let's see what the heck happens. Actually, as a physics object that we can interact with. Now, as far as pushing it, you actually get that, which is unfortunate. That's just how the default character is set up. Now, if I go into Tab and to bring up the console, and I do physics gun and hit Enter, you have to scroll with the mouse button to get it to work, and it might take you a second. But when you get this, there's no this is a weapon, but it's considered not placeable, so you don't see it by default. But actually, if you go in and change the script, you can make it, but there's no geometry for it. So if I hold down the left mouse button, you can see it does a very simple pulse. And if I hold down the right mouse button, it holds onto the object, enables me to move it around. So this is pretty cool what you can do. And then if I want to change the weight of it, I'll go back to Content Browser, pull it up, go back and find that object, go back in the Static Mesh Editor, and I'll show you another way later. But right now you can come in, and if we go into Body Setup and look around, there's the mass scale, which is the weight. So if I do 0.1, that's basically 1/10 the weight that it was before, and go in and save that. I don't have to rebuild because the physics engine will just calculate it and play. It moves. Now, if it's too light, it might actually fly out of the scene, which can happen. So if you go and you pull up the options and different controls, there's a couple things you can do. You can cap out the max physics velocity. You can also limit it, and there's also ways that you can evaluate how often it's checked. So just things to be aware of. Now, one thing you'll see is right now by default, if someone gets hit by it, it causes damage. The other thing is wait now, it won't wake on start. So if I take a physics object and put it up there, go to play, and look at the scene, it's not moving until I knock it down and I get hit by it bouncing on my head. So that's basically what the wake is about, as opposed to toggling that on and then do play from here. Now watch the box, it automatically at the beginning of the game. So those are just some little things to be aware of. There's also an ability to ride on stuff, which might not seem necessarily obvious, but there's pawn can base on, which basically means a character, basically a bot or a player can actually ride on it. And then base, safe base if asleep, if it's basically if a pawn goes on it, it basically goes to sleep. So there's some different things you can do to control it, and it just takes a little bit of working with that. There's also ways you can keep it so it stays upright, etc. So a lot of controls, but you got the basics, and that's really what we're kind of looking at with this. So we're done with this first setup, and now what we're going to do is we're going to basically move on, and we're going to talk briefly about ragdoll. So a ragdoll is basically a collection of rigid body objects, and if we go into character, and the character packages that's default, and scroll through a little, there are these things called physics assets. And if I double click this and open it up, I will get an editor, and let's see, it might be minimized. There we go. And if we look at this, you can see that this is the character, the robot that we use a lot of the times, default robot. And you can see there's different boxes on it, and they're assigned to the different components or different bones of the animation. And if I hit play, it basically falls down to the ground. You can see everything's connected, and there's different constraints. So this is a collection of basic rigid bodies, which are basic shapes. You can see 19 of them, and they're all connected. There's 18 constraints that control how they interact with each other. So the cool thing about this is if you grab any physics asset, you can create your own as well, but you need to have geometry plus the bones, which I'll show you in a minute. You can drag this into the scene. Now, I don't want to accidentally have it in between, because when it turns on, half of it will be in and the other half will be out. And let's move it out of the way a little. Okay, and let's do play from here. And now, move it around, you can see that acts as a physics object, and the calculating is actually getting knocked out of the scene, so half of it's in the scene and the other half's out. And if I do physics gun, you'll see that you can really make a mess out of this, because you can stretch it and you can do, oh, there we go. So we can do all kind of stuff with it. It's kind of odd. You can see there's some weird distortions that are happening, but you kind of get the idea as far as what you can do with that. So that's a static body. Not a static body, a ragdoll. So let's make our own where we can look at adding a rig and setting up different things. So I'm going to do just a new scene. I'm going to do create box, and then I'm going to set it to box this time, and I'll do keyboard entry again, and the length I'm going to keep at 128, the width I'm going to do 64, and the height I'm going to do 8. And create. Now we get a box. We're just going to keep this real simple, and I'll turn on snapping so that it's consistent. I'll hold down shift to copy it, and I'm just going to create a copy. It won't ask me how many. I'll do 4 and hit OK, and frame extends all. We'll bring this out and look at it. Now you can see that we have these different objects. Now you can't export these and bring them in individually, so you have to combine all of them into one unit and before you export to Unreal. So the way you do that is you add a modifier. The one I'd recommend is doing the edit poly modifier, which basically converts the base procedural geometry of the box into a polygon. There's also edit meshes, which is the older file format before polygons. It's another name, which is why you see both of them. So the edit poly is newer and the edit meshes is older, but if you talk to some people, they go back and forth, and that's why I call it a static mesh, not a static polygon. So we'll go into this